بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم
الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله أما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته ومغفرته. So this video is in response to a video I saw online by an individual called Nabeel Qureshi. Nabeel Qureshi is a guy who's allegedly an ex-Muslim, yeah? And basically he's become a Christian, he's converted into Christianity, and he now basically tries to convert Muslims into Christianity by saying that, you know, I've kind of been there and I've seen the problems in Islam, and don't worry, I know I was there, I kind of lived that life, and basically now I found the truth in Jesus Christ kind of thing. So I was sent this video by a Christian lady. She mentioned that, you know, Nabeel Qureshi is an individual who has answers to the questions that I ask from Christians, right? And I was like intrigued, like let's see what he has to say. Let's see what the guy has to say. Like maybe he can provide me with a good discussion, right? And to be honest, it was really quite disappointing. Now, before I go into the video and explaining the points and then, you know, calling Nabeel to the tawheed of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is singling Allah in worship alone and not associating any partners with God, i.e. whether it be Jesus or whatever have you, I want to mention something that's a big problem already that I see from the title of the video. The video is called Main Problem of a Muslim Solved by an Ex-Muslim. The question that we need to ask ourselves, is Nabeel Qureshi an ex-Muslim? Well, I messaged him on Twitter because I heard this and I didn't know if it was true, but I wanted to clarify it. So I tweeted him and I said, listen, are you an Ahmadi? Or are you a Muslim? I'm sorry, did you used to be an Ahmadi? Or did you used to be a Muslim? He said, I used to be an Ahmadi, but I went to a Sunni mosque my whole life. Now, what is an Ahmadi? An Ahmadi or Ahmadiyya is a religion that has nothing to do with Islam. Ahmadiyya has about as much to do with Islam as Christianity has to do with Judaism. Why do I say this? You see, Ahmadis have a prophet called Ghulam Mirza Ahmed, okay? This is a man who came about recent years, okay? And he claimed prophethood and said that he was another prophet after the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him. And apparently revelation came to him and they have holy scriptures from him and whatnot. He's a totally new prophet. He did somehow say and mention the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, the same way Christians of today do mention the teachings of Moses. But just because Christians today mention the teachings of Moses, are Christians called Jews? Can they go around saying that we're Jews? Would the Jews affirm them to be Jews? Or did they separate and say, no, we're Christians? The same way with Mormons. Don't Mormons go around preaching the teachings of Jesus Christ? But they have a new prophet called Joseph Smith. And that's the guy who they follow, right? So the same way with Islam, prophethood ends at the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him. Clearly in the Quran, Allah said he is Khatam al-Nabi. He is the seal of the prophets. There is no prophet after him. Now you have another guy who comes across and says, I'm a prophet. He's not only going directly against the Quran, but the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. And Islam is the Quran and what the Prophet, peace be upon him, taught. So Ahmadis are not Muslim. And that's very misleading, and that's extremely insincere to put yourself across like you used to be a Muslim when your religion was totally different. And it doesn't matter that you spent your whole life going to a Sunni mosque. That's the same as a Christian who spent his whole life going to a synagogue. Yet he doesn't believe the way the Christians believe. Sorry, the Jews believe. And the Jews don't believe what he believes. They're two separate religions. And you know what? I'm not saying this, maybe Nabeel's not doing this, even though it kind of, you know, it looks bad on his part. But in our religion, we're told to not really necessarily make assumptions before we can clarify. But I have come across Christian missionaries who do this a lot. They pretend to be ex-Muslims, man. In fact, there's a whole book written on this issue called Call of the Minaret, which is written by one of the high priests of Christianity from Jerusalem. And this whole book is like a manual, like a da'wah manual, like a missionary manual that is given to Christians so they can learn how to bring Muslims into Christianity. The whole book is lies and deception, and it teaches them to lie and deceive and do things like this. And my question is that if your religion is real, then why do you need to come with those kind of dodgy little things? Why can't you be straight? Let the truth speak for itself. If you're an Ahmadi, be real with the people. Tell them, I used to be an Ahmadi. I never used to be a Muslim. Because Ahmadis themselves believe we're disbelievers. And we believe they're disbelievers. We have no connection. That there's two separate religions. The East and the West. Christianity, Judaism. Mormonism, Christianity. Separate. Please be sincere. And please, don't mislead the people. I mean, imagine, like that's not even what, surely it's not what my religion teaches, and it's not what your religion teaches you, I'm sure. So let's go into it now. What's the question? What's the alleged main problem? And this is not necessarily the main problem, but what is the alleged main problem of a Muslim that he solves?
How can God be finite and then infinite at the same time? Like this is like it's like saying that there could exist a square circle. It's a logical fallacy, right? So when we say that Jesus was God or Son of God, we are actually saying that God existed in finitude during the life of Jesus, and he also is infinite at the same time. This is logically fallacious.
Now you have to understand the question the brother is asking here. He's saying God is infinite, right? Allah is infinite. Yet Jesus, he's a man, he's finite, right? He's limited. God is unlimited. He's saying you have two opposites. How can two opposites be present in one essence at the exact same time? It's like me saying this cup is present, yes, yet it's absent at the same time. It's like me saying I'm fat but I'm skinny at the exact same time. It's like me saying I'm a square but I'm a circle at the exact same time. It's impossible. You're either one or the other. Yet with the claim that Jesus is God, you're trying to say a man who's infinite and he's limited by human and characteristics that the creation has. You're trying to say at the same time he's God, which has totally opposite characteristics to that which the human being has. Okay? So now we're going to listen to his explanation of this. We're going to listen to his explanation of this. His response. Apparently him solving the problem.
बहुत खुशी हुई आपसे मिलके.
लेकिन आपकी बात को सुनने में हमें कोई खुशी नहीं हुई, क्योंकि आप झूठ बोल रहे हैं. आप मुसलमान नहीं थे, अहमदी थे. सच बुरा करें.
Can Allah come onto this world if He wants? Can He be in this world if He wants?
I wouldn't think so.
You wouldn't think so. So Allah's omnipotence is limited. He can't come onto this world.
It's like basically Allah Ta'ala cannot do logically fallacious thing. Like He cannot create a square circle, right? Mm-hmm. Because that's something logically fallacious.
But how do we know that's what this
is? That Allah
but how do we know that's what this is? Because, for example, in Surah Al-Imran, when Allah is talking to Moses, it says in Surah Al-Imran, I think it's Surah Al-Imran, it might be Surah 18, but double check, that Allah, as He spoke to Moses, Allah was in the bush. Allah was in the bush. So if you want to say that meant something else, well, you're going to have to argue with the Quran on that one. It seems to be pretty clear that Allah can emanate His voice from a physical place. He can be in a physical place in a sense. In the same way, I don't believe that God coming to this earth limits His omnipotence. It's not a limitation of His omnipotence. Jesus has taken on flesh. God the Father is still everywhere. God, Jesus, the Son, is here on this earth. It's a limitation in that sense, but it's not a limitation of His nature. He is both the divine and human nature. That's the argument. Now, I want to talk about briefly, and then we're...
I mean, I really don't know what to say there. That's really sad. Not only have you not explained his point, but you tried to kind of push his point away by using a Quranic story and evidence as an example. And not only did you get the story wrong, but you even messed up the reference. It's not in Surah Ali Imran, but I give you that because you said it could have been in Surah Al-Kahf, which is number 18. But it's not in 18 either. And this is common. I mean, Surah Al-Kahf is a surah that Muslims read regularly, like every week. Surah Ali Imran is known to us. It's in Surah Al-Taha, verse number 11. Chapter 20, verse 11. And the fact that you made this mistake and the mistake of the narrative, which is a story that we're taught as little kids, everyone knows this story, the fact that you got it wrong is a sign and indication to show us that you really don't know Islam. How could you have been a Muslim when you don't even know the religion? It's because you weren't ever a Muslim. So please stop misleading the people. It's not nice, okay? And deception is something that's not even praiseworthy in Christianity. And it's punishable by God. Even the way you guys see it. So now what is it? A bit of background information. I mean, I'll educate you. It's my religion at the end of the day. Moses, he leaves where he's staying in Midian to go towards Egypt. And as he's going in the darkness, he's traveling with his family, he sees a fire that's burning. So he decides to go towards the fire to get a torch so he can use it as a light of guidance. When he gets there, Allah tells us in the 11th verse, فَلَمَّا أَتَاهَا نُودِيَ يَا مُوسَى. When he came to it, the fire, he was called. He wasn't called by the fire itself. He wasn't called by the fire. But the calling came from the direction of the fire. And this is how Muslims have understood it. And if you want, you can go check the exegesis of the Quran. For example, Imam al-Qurtubi, in his great exegesis of the Quran, and he explains this verse, the Mufassir as we call it in Arabic, you can go and he explains the verse just like this. And this is how the Islamic narrative has always been. There's no mention of no bush. There's no mention of the sound coming from the bush. It was coming from the direction. We don't have a problem if you was to say that perhaps Allah emanated his voice from the direction of the bush. Okay? That's a different story. That's not what you're saying. You're trying to say he's in the bush. Because the question that the brother asked you at the beginning is, how can you have two opposites there at the exact same time? Something that's infinite and something that's finite. And now you have God who's infinite and he's inside the bush and the bush is finite. How is that happening? And you're trying to say it happened in the Quran. And no, it didn't. You got it wrong. Okay? And you didn't give us a satisfactory explanation of the question that we asked you. So I'm going to pose the question to you one more time, but I'm going to pose it to you in a different way. Okay? Before I pose the question to you, I want us to establish something that the both of us agree upon. When we look at God's characteristics, we can characterize his characteristics into two categories. And I know you're going to agree upon me with this, because it's preposterous to not agree upon me on this. That sounded a bit arrogant. I didn't mean it like that. I just meant, from your religion and from my religion's perspective, this is a point that we agree upon, and it wouldn't make sense to go against it. So here's what I'm trying to say. When you look at the characteristics of God, they're in two categories. The first category, we can call it characteristics that are connected to the essence of God, right? For example, his knowledge is connected to his essence. It's there with him, it's present with him at all times. His power, his mercy, it's all directly connected to him, okay? The other characteristic of the other category of God's characteristics are characteristics that are connected to his will. They're not necessarily connected to him at all times. He chooses to do them as he wills. For example, creation. He creates when he wills, and when he doesn't will, he doesn't create. So that characteristic, even though it's his ability to do it is present all the time, but him actually creating all the time is not necessarily with him all the time. So now these are the two categories. Now here's the question and here's the problem. When Jesus came onto earth, and you're saying that he's God, and he chose to give up some of his godly characteristics, so we can experience what it's like to be human and flesh and die for our sins, as you say, then it's impossible for all of his characteristics to be given up. It's impossible for him to come onto the earth and be fully human. Because God would only be able to give up characteristics that are connected to his will. For argument's sake, let's say Jesus is God. If that's the case, then he would only be able to stop creating like God creates. He would only be able to stop punishing how God punishes, for example, or doing things that are connected to God's will, to his choice. But things that are connected to his essence, he can't disconnect from them. God can't disconnect from them, because if he did, he wouldn't be God anymore. It defeats the purpose. Knowledge is one of those things. Now when we go into Jesus' life and we look at it both from a Quranic and you can look at it from a, from a scriptural biblical perspective, you find that his knowledge was limited. I mean, for example, when he was asked about the day of judgment, the hour, what did he say? He said, no one knows. Not even the Father. He said, no one knows. Not even the angels in the heavens. Not even the Son himself. Only the Father. That's a clear-cut example that Jesus didn't know the day of judgment. The day of judgment that he set, he's God, right? According to you, he's God. He set the day of judgment. He set it. He put that day down. He mentioned, this is the day, right? Okay, well, he should know, right? He couldn't have forgotten. If he forgot, then he's not God, because God doesn't forget. Or if he knows and he's deceiving the people, then God doesn't deceive either. The only logical conclusion is that he wasn't God. He wasn't God. It doesn't make sense, because and he couldn't have left the characteristic of knowledge, because that's always connected to him. It's connected to his very divinity. If you take that away, he's not God anymore. Period. Right? He's not God on earth. He's not God in the heavens. Nowhere is he God. He left that characteristic. And you're trying to say on earth he's God and human at the same time. I'm trying to say, show me one characteristic that Jesus has. Show me one characteristic that Jesus has that proves to us that he has a godly characteristic. You're going to say to me, he brought the dead back from the life. That's a miracle. Moses did miracles too. He split the Red Sea. Right? Sorry, he split the sea. Do human beings go around splitting the sea? No, that's also something that's only permissible with God's permission. God did that he allowed Moses to do that as a sign for the people. The same way he allowed Jesus to bring the dead back from the life. They're both things that humans can't do, right? You're going to tell me, he forgives. Human beings forgive as well. Don't we forgive? How do we know his forgiveness? Tell me a characteristic that he does that's uniquely like God. For example, God is unlimited. Humans are limited. God is all knowledgeable. Humans are not knowledgeable. God is all powerful. Humans are weak. God is self-sufficient. Humans are needy. God is independent. Humans are dependent. Jesus is all of these human characteristics. Jesus didn't have all knowledge. Day of Judgment, for example, he wasn't all powerful. He got killed, for goodness sake. Yeah, he was resurrected. He got resurrected. But on the Day of Judgment, we're all going to be resurrected. Again, something that only happens to humans. Humans die and we're all resurrected. You believe that? I believe that. He was needy. He needed to be in the womb of his mother to take nutrients before he came out. He needed to be circumcised. He couldn't circumcise himself. He needed to eat food. In fact, the Quran mentions this point. In Surah Al-Ma'idah, chapter 5 of the Quran, Allah tells us, how can Jesus be God? And how can the Catholics say that Mary is divine and godly? They both used to eat. If they both used to eat, that means obviously they would have to go and defecate. Can you imagine God defecating? Can you imagine God having to urinate? Can you imagine God having to do these filthy human characteristics? It shows that this, not only is he needy, because Jesus, if he didn't eat, he would die. As a human being, he was a human, he would die. He has needs that he needs to have fulfilled. If he doesn't have them fulfilled, he's gonna die. So not only is he needy, but also you're attributing to God like really lowly characteristics that human beings do, you know? So again, coming back to my final point, right? We're trying to say you can't have two opposites present at the exact same time, right? You're trying to say Jesus is two opposites at the exact same time. He's God and human at the same time. I'm trying to show you something possible, okay? Because, God has certain characteristics that if he was to leave them, he wouldn't be God no more, okay? So it doesn't make sense. Now I'm asking you, can you provide an explanation for that? And if you can't, which you can't, why are you diverting worship that is only for Allah to Jesus? Why are you diverting worship that is only for the one true God who created you and even created Jesus when he was in the womb of his mother and he was an embryo, he was a fetus, became an embryo, he became a baby, he came out the whole way through. That was God who created him. God fashioned him. And Jesus himself used to worship God. In the Quran, he says that he's a slave of God. Even in your Bible, he clearly used to worship God. In the Garden of Gethsemane, he fell on his face. He used to pray to God. He used to pray to God alone. He never prayed to anyone besides the one true God. He even said, what did he say? He said, your Lord is the one true God. Hear, O Israel, your Lord is the one true God. He worshipped one God alone. But what you're doing is you're worshipping Jesus and he never asked you to worship him. You're praying to Jesus and he never asked you to pray to him. And that is the reason why God punished so many nations in the past. Even if you go to your Torah, it's filled with it. I don't need to, the Quran is sufficient for me. But even if you go into your own book, you see in the Torah, God punishes and annihilates nations again and again. Why? Because they worship other than God. They set up idols besides God, or they worship people besides God. The fact that you do that, you will not be able to acquire safety from the wrath of God. But if you worship him alone, you will acquire his mercy and his love, his love, which is conditioned upon the fact that you worship him alone. So please, I ask you, Nabeel, okay, please come back to Allah. Come back to Allah. Worship him alone. And guide those Christians who follow you to the truth, the oneness of Allah's worship. Free yourself from worshipping anyone besides him. Does it make sense that he created you alone? He sustains you alone. He provides for you and controls your affairs alone. Yet you don't worship him alone. You worship him with Jesus.